There's a lot of women that feel this way, and I'm not afraid to admit I am a better parent as a single parent. When I'm dealing with difficult times, my mindset or the tools or the way in which I push through the anxiety to fly, I can then apply to those situations when they do happen again.
Welcome back to a Road Less Doubtful podcast. I met this beautiful lady just before I went and did my paragliding course, and her name is Raelene Bettles. Hi, Raelene.
Paragliding, it was something that I wanted to do to challenge myself mentally. It wasn't about the flying or the being in the air or the adrenaline. It was, can I have the strength or the stamina to mentally push through? One of the biggest things that we carry in a separation, particularly as mums, is how are we going to actually cope with, or how catastrophic is this going to be to my children and also to me, and how will I cope not having my children? And you can do some really wonderful things and still have a really wonderful relationship with your children as well. And I think that's really important.
Hello. Welcome back to a Road Less Doubtful podcast. Today, I am jumping on with, I'm going to definitely say a friend, but we've only met a handful of times, but we have formed this connection. And I think that's what we're going to be talking about, is the fact that you meet the most random and nicest and coolest people when you're doing things that are truly aligned with who you are and where you want to go and stepping into your power. And I met this beautiful lady just before I went and did my paragliding course, and her name is Raelene Bettles. So hi, Raelene, how are you?
Hello, Em. Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for stepping outside of your comfort zone again. I mean, it's hard enough to do it paragliding, but you've done it by stepping in and having a chat to me. And this conversation came about because we did chat paragliding a little bit. You weren't on my course. You had done it before me. But we hung out when I was just playing with the wing on the beach, and we had a few little chats, and then you actually started listening to the podcast a little bit, and you're like, I had a feeling that there was more to our connection, right? And then we realized that there was a few synchronicities there. And so we're going to chat about all of that. But first, I just want you to do a little introduction as to who Ray is, maybe why she paraglided, and yeah, let's see where this flows.
Yeah, I can talk to that. I'm a 46-year-old single mum living on the Sunshine Coast, work as an IT professional. I've got 3 children with a big age gap. So I was a young mum and an older mum as well. So that sort of shaped a little bit of who I am. But in terms of paragliding, it was something that I wanted to do to challenge myself mentally. It wasn't about the flying or the being in the air or the adrenaline. It was, can I have the strength or the stamina to mentally push through flying off the edge of a cliff? And how would I do that? I knew that I would get anxiety being up on the launch or even just at the thought of flying. So I had done a tandem prior to doing the course, so I knew what I was in for. But I knew that the anxiety would actually be quite overwhelming for me. Anxiety is something that I've had for many, many years. It has started sort of in my mid to late 20s when I lost my mum. And then from there has come and gone in patches. But I knew that anxiety was going to be the killer, so to speak, to me, launching off that cliff and actually achieving that PG2 license. So I did it for that challenge. So I didn't know whether I was going to get licensed or not, or even if I would fly solo. And it certainly was a significant journey from an anxiety perspective. But I managed to do it. So I'm proud to say that I'm now licensed and can and do fly solo. So I did get through it. But yeah, that was sort of the reason why I decided to go ahead and push through it.
I love the fact that we can say that we're pilots, we're paragliding pilots. It's like the coolest feeling in the world. And I can't wait to get to fly with you. And we get to do that together, because the same thing for me, it was about the self-trust. So it was, I could do that for someone else. I went and did my tandem, and anyone else who's listened to some of those previous podcasts know that I was like, that was easy. I was like, sure, I just want to do it. And I don't know you from a bar of soap, but sure, like fly me off a cliff. Why is that so much easier then trusting yourself to do it. So I really wanted to rise to that challenge, and that's what you're speaking into. And I think maybe that comes from the way we grew up. Maybe that comes from being single mums. Maybe like we know we have the grit, we know we have the resilience, but I know sometimes when it comes to doing things for us, or just like you said, that anxiety, or what's more behind that, why, do we need to?
Yeah, and I think because it is an adrenaline rush, and it is something that, can be quite enjoyable, but it does bring you from, I guess a fear or an anxiety perspective. Like it brings you to fears that you would typically experience in bad situations. And that's how I sort of made that connection to, if I can push through that when I'm presented those bad situations, and some of my backstory, I've certainly been presented with a number of those, but it was, I guess, sort of having that challenge of this isn't a bad situation, but it's presenting me a similar feeling of anxiety or a similar fear. If I can push through those fears when it's a pleasant situation, so to speak, I'm going to gain something that's really fun out of this. Then when I'm dealing with difficult times, which we all face in different stages of our lives for multiple different reasons, then my mindset or the tools or the way in which I push through the anxiety to fly, I can then apply to those situations if and when, well, not if, when they do happen again, because it is a matter of when. And that's what I've learned, I guess, through my journey over the past 20 years, so to speak, that it isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and being prepared for those things to happen. That was a means to sort of trying to deal with that.
And I think there's so many ways we can draw comparisons to that. So like you said, you're not in a position where you do have to face the tough thing when you're about to fly off the cliff, but you're putting yourself in a situation that you want to be doing, but it's still bringing up all of those same feelings. But then you have to accept the fact that you've got yourself into this position. And now how do you step off and fly? Because you know what it's going to feel like on the other side. So if you look at that as like a real life scenario in a marriage breakdown, dealing with your kids, going for a new job, whatever, I think it now just gives you something to look back at and go, okay, what can I do in this situation? How do I normally react? So like when you're anxious or stressed, you push and control. My thing was always push, control, hold on tight, nothing bad can happen. But every time I did that, shit got worse. It was worse, and I was less of me, less fun, I just wasn't the person I wanted to be. And what I learnt, or what I was reminded of, because it's all nature. So there's things you can't control, there's things you've got to flow with. So you get that wing up, you breathe, and I've said this on here before, right? Breathe and smile, two things. Like you're tackling it head on. What can I do in this position? We smile and breathe, and then we go with what we can control. And then you flow. You don't try and control so much, you start flowing with it and using, and just, I don't know. I'd like to hear what you think has changed for you, or where you pull that info.
Well, I think in terms of what's changed for me is and I've spoken about this before in a professional forum, was that I became quite pragmatic in the way that I deal with things. So flying does present you with a set of conditions. Like you said, you bring the wing up and you might be on the edge of the launch, and you've done your 5-point check prior, and then that's it. You've got to go. There's nothing left to, hold back. And I tried to find many things to stop me from actually having to go, but, pushing through that. But then once you're actually in the air, you're presented with conditions, and those conditions can change really quickly. It's weather. So we don't have control over, what's going to happen when we're up there in the air. And I guess from that perspective, that sort of gave me a really different view on life in that. And I have used pragmatism, so to speak, as a tool before. So being pragmatic, looking at the conditions that you're presented with and then dealing with them. And I liken that back to situations that I've gone through in my life. But flying really brought it home, because when you are up there in the air, you do have to be aware of all of the conditions, and you don't have a choice what happens in those conditions. If there's a wind gust, or there's a thermal, or there's something that you need to deal with, you need to deal with and react to that quite quickly. And I think from that perspective, when I look at that now, in my everyday life, I've become a lot better at, being presented with conditions, be it good or bad, and then dealing with those accordingly and not letting sort of, the negative thoughts creep in or not panicking. So panicking was something that I was really, really terrified of, that I would do when I was in the air. So if something was to happen, if I was presented with something that, potentially like a wing collapse or whatever it may have been, that I would panic and that I wouldn't actually have the, the mental ability to make corrections or changes. But what I actually found is it did happen to me. So I did go out over the ocean and came down quite quickly with not enough room to make it back onto dry sand. And the ground rush was quite significant, but I didn't panic in that moment. I actually maintained that sort of mental stability to actually control the glider. So I guess for me, the whole paragliding experience, one, made me realize the significance of how small we actually really are, because when you are up in the air and when nature does, kick in and take control, it changes things. But second to that if you keep your mindset on the conditions and don't let it get outside of what is actually happening in front of you. So I guess, to give some context to that, when I was on the launch, I would be envisioning myself falling out of the sky from 850 feet and, hitting the ground. That was so unrealistic. And that's been something that I've done in life a lot, catastrophizing things and sort of looking at it and going, and if I think about that in terms of like my separation, it would have been easy. And I did to some extent catastrophize things. Things were going to be quite catastrophic. In hindsight, that didn't happen, but also in terms of, I guess, from that flying perspective, because I was catastrophizing everything so much and not just dealing with the conditions. The conditions were perfect. The updraft was fine. The wind speed was correct. Everything about the conditions were correct. I was never going to fall out of the sky. But I guess that's where I'm sort of coming from with flying. What made me really think about, well, I am safe. The conditions that I am dealing with are safe, and I don't need to catastrophize this and it's not going to happen the way that my mind's actually telling me things are going to happen.
I think you've touched on some amazing, amazing bits there, because like you said, you've kind of got to do two things. So we can take this now into real life stuff. We've both dealt with a separation, but it could be anything. It can be anything, friendships, workspace, kids, right? It is so easy for us to get so far ahead of where we need to be and overthink and overanalyze and do all of those things. And you know what I'm like? Intuition is a big one. Females generally, if we can slip back into that space, great. I'm not saying don't use your mind and don't use your logic, but let's not go we're going to drop out of the sky as soon as we get up, because we've looked at the conditions, right? We've controlled the controllables, and then there's got to be some kind of faith, some kind of whatever you want to call it, some kind of, okay, I've got this, and some self-trust. And without it, you're always going to see all of the obstacles instead of the opportunities. And I think that's what we need to talk into, because the flip side is, okay, I've done my 5-foot safety check and my wing's gone up beautifully. And then you're not seeing any of the bad. You're not looking at the wind's about to change and you're just going to go off and you're just going to go, oh, well, and you're just flippant. And then shit does happen and you do fall from the sky. So that's the other side. But if you look at it from a separation, or that it comes down to self-trust. It's like, okay, I've done what I can do. I've done the best thing that I can do. I've done every bit that I know within my power. And now there's a little bit of self-trust, a little bit of intuition, and a little bit of presence, right? And I know for me that when I let go of that control, especially early on in the marriage and that piece, I was like, nah, I've got to keep everything together, because otherwise I'm going to get hurt more. But when I just softened back and went, I trust that everything's going to work out for me and not everyone is against me, it flowed a bit better. And I didn't have to have the answers.
Yeah. And I think something that as mums and when we go through a separation, probably one of the things that we catastrophize the most is what happens with the kids, right? So generally there'll be some form of separation now, more common these days to be 50-50. It was less common when I separated from my first partner, when my eldest daughter we went through that, it was, 50-50 was less common. It was more a 70-30 or even an 80-20. And that was a different experience. But I guess in terms of relating that to sort of that catastrophizing or, wondering if everything was going to be okay, I think that's one of the biggest things that we carry in a separation, particularly as mums, is, how are we going to actually cope with, or how catastrophic is this going to be to my children and also to me, and how will I cope not having my children, and how will that look for me? And, and often we think, I'm going to be, devastated. Like, I didn't think I would actually function. As I said, I've been a mum since I was 20 years old. And I'm now 46. So it's a long stint for a parent. Generally, you've had your children rather close together. I had quite a big gap. I'm still parenting at 46. But I guess, so I thought, what am I going to do? Like, I only know myself as being a mum. Everything that I have done, I've been a mum, like I've always had children there. So that was something that I could have easily catastrophized. And I guess, to some extent I probably did. But in talking about being pragmatic, if you look at this as this is a condition that you're presented, you're both parents, you both need to share, and you do want your children to have a relationship with both parents. If you look at that and take that for what it is and don't internalize that guilt, you can make the better situation of that. I would not have been able to, I couldn't paraglide if I had my children all the time. I couldn't have the time to actually explore what is it that I want to do and who am I and, how do I potentially want to live this new life now if I had children all the time. So I think that's one of the things, I guess, in terms of, how can we take those conditions and make it better for ourselves rather than sort of, going down into the doldrums of I'll never survive because I don't have my children. You can do some really wonderful things and still have a really wonderful relationship with your children as well. And I think that's really important.
I absolutely agree. Before I talk on that, I'm curious to know how long it took you to feel that way, because it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to go from, and because you've been doing it a bit longer too. So, we're both 3 years post-separated this time, right? That's just one of those other similarities. You both lost a parent. There's been so many things, which is what's so cool about this. But I really want to talk about this because it's not something that is widely talked about. I think there's a little bit of shame and the judgment, the self-judgment, and maybe not necessarily everyone else's judgment, but I'm just curious first how long you feel it took you to get to this place of accepting that, what, it's okay for me to do it this way.
When starting my journey of self-discovery, I felt alone and lost. That's why I'm so incredibly dedicated to this podcast and passionate about building you a place of community to help you remember exactly who you were before life got in the way. So with that said, word of mouth is one way we can grow this community. So please share this with your friends and family. And so you don't miss an episode, I'd love for you to tap the subscribe button. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah. Look, I couldn't put a time frame on it. It's difficult for me to put a time frame on it. In terms of, when we did separate, we pretty much sort of started 50-50 straight away. So it kind of, was put in place straight away. Let's just say for the first, few months, I spent those weeks when I didn't have the kids in quite a dark place and thinking, who am I and what do I do with myself? What do I do when I don't need to cook dinner for a family? What do I do when it's just me? Like, what do I do when there's no washing? And how do I spend that time? Because I'm also, working full time as a professional, and the time that I did have before was dedicated to dishes and washing and kids and the whole family situation. So there was that part of it. So I guess for me, there was two parts to accepting it. And you made a really good point. The first part was, how do I actually get through the week when I don't have the kids, and what do I do with that time? And it probably took me, let's just say, a few months to actually adjust to that. I found myself just sort of like going to bed early and not sort of doing anything because I really sort of was lost in terms of what do I do. But the guilt and the shame piece probably took a lot longer, especially when I was at school events and things like that, and you go along to them, and you sort of, you know, a little bit in that sort of spotlight. Everybody kind of knows you've separated, and when you're the parent on the off week and you go along to the off week and the kids aren't with you, I found that to take a lot longer for me to actually accept that those situations were normal, for one, and two, to be comfortable with it and actually sort of, I guess, stand there in that situation quite comfortably and not feel uncomfortable with it. So, yeah, look, I would say, you know, 6 to 8 months before I was really comfortable with it. And then once I became comfortable with it, that's when I started to really, you know, take advantage of the situation and go, okay, well, you know, I've always sort of, I guess, looked at it in terms of it's almost like that hand that you dealt. And particularly, my earbud keeps falling out, but particularly in a separation situation, for me, one of the things that I used as a tool to sort of overcome that was to say, well, we both as a couple didn't set out to be single parents. You know, we set out to parent our children together. They are our children, and we're both, one of the key things is that we're actually both equally responsible. I think as a mother, you feel that there's a higher percentage of responsibility for you to take care of the children. So being able to reframe my mindset and say, well, we're actually both accountable and responsible for the children. We didn't actually set out to be single parents. So we have to make the most of the situation that we have. So again, coming back to those conditions, these are the conditions. So make the most of the conditions and allow yourself to, I guess, you know, not feel guilty that the father of your children is looking after the children. That should be completely natural. And I think from upbringing, and, you know, I was brought up in a bit of a different era. Like, my mum stayed at home, and I've heard you talk about this as well in previous episodes. Mum was always at home. Mum was always looking after us. Dad was sort of less around, more, you know, bringing the income, putting food on the table. So I think from that, I've always carried as well that feeling of responsibility where I need to be the caregiver all the time, and I need to be there for the children all of the time. So letting go of that, it's really, really difficult. But once you do, you then, I guess, free yourself from that burden of feeling that way.
Yeah, even when you introduced yourself, I was going to pull you up, and I didn't. I was like, nah, leave it. Because you introduced yourself, single, mum of 3, and then what you do for a job. And I was like, okay, but who are you, Ray? Like, who are you without that? You know, and that's part of what we do. It's part of how we are used to introducing ourselves. I remember when I wrote this doubtful website, and I was like, right, how about me? Oh, shit. Single mum of 3, cosmetic tattooist. But that's not who I am. Who am I? And trying to do that isn't easy. And that's sort of like what you're saying, right? It's not getting rid of. We are mums. We do work. We love our jobs. We like providing. We like to nurture. It's been part of our identity, but it's not who we are. And there's so many pieces of this puzzle. I think we could talk on this for the next 40 minutes and not have to bring up anything else. And so many women would relate to it. So maybe that's where this podcast will just continue to go, because the identity we hold around being a mum and doing it the right way for whatever the fuck that is like, no, we have to get rid of that. And we were both at fault. You know, like yourself and your husband, whatever. It takes 2. It always takes 2. Did we do enough? Did we not? You know, you can't just be like, okay, and be really flippant. For me, you know, looking at it and then being separated, and I think I even said this to you just the other day at the beach when you're flying your glider, I was like, it was really hard for me because that 50-50 piece, I didn't have my kids to have them half the time. Yet, admitting this is even still a little bit hard, because we would always joke, well, it would be easier to be separated because then you would get the kids half the time and I'd get my own life. And then it happened, and I remember going, oh, fuck, I did that. I manifested that, and now I'm responsible for the fact that my kids see me half the time. And I held on to that for quite a while, going, that's not okay. You've just done that to the kids. And I really had to flip it and go, that's not what happened here. And your kids come into your life And I don't know. And it depends on what you believe. And maybe I sell myself on this because it makes me feel better. But I do actually fully believe that your kids are given to you to teach you so much and to learn what they're supposed to learn. And so without us separating, they wouldn't have got their dad as much because dad was always at work, and they wouldn't have got me as much because I was working and I was less happy. And now on the flip side, I finish work at 2:30 when I found so much more joy in that week of work. I when we first separated, I just threw in his face. It was nasty. It's not okay. But I was like, you're going to enjoy your week away, and you're not going to want the kids as much, so I'll end up having them, and I can see that that's what's going to happen. That's nasty. But it's what I said. And then I had to then look at me and go, oh, you were so wrong. Like, he thought that. He did. But he stepped up and he's had to do all of the letters for school that he never knew how to. I've had to whip a snip and do all these other things that I didn't know how to. We've started to find this balance. We help each other out in that. But I had to admit that I actually really like my weeks, and I've had to learn to clock on back into the kids, and I've had to learn these things. And that is okay. It's all a learning, and it's okay to change the identity piece and relearn these things. And now go, hold on, I am so much more of me. And now I know how to write my about me a bit differently.
Yeah, look, I think I'm still working on the about me. I think, as I mentioned before, I've been a mum for so long, it's at the forefront of the mind. But it's interesting what you talk about, because my experience, I guess, was slightly different in that I worked away quite a bit during our marriage, doing consulting and working, flying in and flying out. So my husband was actually, quite hands-on as a parent, comparatively. So I'd had a bit of, I guess what I'm saying is I'd had a bit of experience being away from the kids for a week at a time, because I would spend a week in one state and then, come back home for a week. So it was almost, a little bit opposite to most traditional, let's call it traditional situations. It's generally husband that's fly in, fly out. Well, I was fly in, fly out. So I'd had a bit of experience of that. But I guess where I was sort of going with this was that I'm a better parent now. And that's really, really hard to admit. And that's for many, many reasons. But I know that during my marriage or parenting the children together, I wasn't the mum that I wanted to be. And that's because there was elements where I was extremely unhappy. So I know that from, I remember times of an evening where I would be, carrying all of the load in terms of those domestic type duties and things like that, as well as working full time. But I remember times where, I would be, elbow deep in dishwater, washing all of the dishes, and just have tears streaming down my face because I was so unhappy, and yet I would never leave the situation. And the reason why I would never leave the situation is because I didn't want to break up the family home for my children. I didn't want to create the 50-50. I'll be bawling in a minute. Bawling's our common trait. But I didn't want to break the 50-50. That was one of the big reasons. Like, I didn't want to go through and have that sort of arrangement for my children. But that being aside, it did happen anyway. But on the flip side of all of that, I'm such a better mum now than what I was when I was when we were parenting together. And I think a lot of that is because, and I'm not afraid to admit it. And this is something that I think, sometimes there's a lot of women that feel this way, and I'm not afraid to admit I am a better parent as a single parent. And I knew that second marriage and second, I call it second round of children. I had a 14-year gap. I actually knew that because I had spent some time as a single mum before I remarried and had 2 more children. So I did know that. And then that sort of the marriage and the circumstances as such, cemented that for me. So for me now, although I lose 50% of the time, the 50% of time that I have equals 100% of the love and the effort and the input and the joy and what I get back out of it. So although the time's less, I guess what I'm saying is the quality's doubled. because the quality of time that I had with the children before was 25% or 15%, because I was so embedded in, doing all of the things that you do as a wife, the cooking, the cleaning, the, taking care of the family, being the organizer and the person that does everything. And same thing, my ex-partners had to learn how to do all of the, the forms and the school stuff and, buying the school books and all those sorts of things, which is not something that he ever did before when we were together. And yeah, it's, that's sort of, I guess, that way I would frame it is that don't always look at the percentage of time, look at the quality. Because, and that's true in all sort of areas of life. Even sometimes we look at just the price of things, but we don't assess the quality, for example. And sometimes something that's cheaper turns out to be a better quality product. And I guess from that perspective, just because you have 50% of the time, it's about the quality of the time that you have. And probably the hardest bit's, readjusting to when they do come back. So you have that week of, what I call freedom. And then when they do come back, adjusting back into the, the noise and the, all of the demands of looking after children. That's the hard part to adjust to from my perspective, or being the harder part to adjust in that space.
Completely agree. And it's a hard thing also to admit, but it's interesting because what this does is show you don't have to be separated to understand this, because it's about where you don't fill your own cup and where you don't give yourself the presence or that time or that space to feel these things. So you don't have that quality and you don't have that freedom. So if you liken it to when we take the space from the kids, most women who listen to this who are mums are going to go, oh yeah, that noise, the kids, that noise, it's just in your head all of the time, right? It's like the radio in the car. It's up and then you're like, oh, I can't take any more mental load. So you turn it off and you just go, oh, well, we get that for 50% of the time now. Our radio is off 50% of the time. But when you're a mum who doesn't have that 50% off, you don't actually realize that your radio is still on. It's like the TV in the background that's playing, Bluey or Wiggles it was for my kids. You didn't even realize it was on because there was already so much going on that you didn't realize there was one more thing there taking your attention or just adding to that clutter. And so now we get to see what it's like to not have the clutter. And I think that's an important message, is take the time to remove the noise so that you can be a better parent or a better wife or a better mum or just a better you. Even though sometimes it's harder to click back in, it's allowing you to realize actually who you are and what you really need and where you're going off course. Where the freaking wind is being blown, of course, because of the stupid weather. Come back to presence and focus and fly to, course correct.
Yeah, and steer it back into where it needs to be. And I think and your point around the noise, like I do remember, both of us when we were, parenting the kids together when we were married, getting to the end of the evening and you're just like, oh my God, because it's so repetitive and it is just, the daily motion of what you go through. We all go through it, and it's, we get through those days like you're hanging out for bedtime. Like it's like, okay, get through the day, get through the school day, the dinner, all the after school activities and all of those things, and get into bed. And the main reason behind that was the silence, right? It was it's the peace and quiet time. And that would, depending on, whether you're a night owl or an early bird, sometimes that could range between, you might have half an hour or you might have, a few hours of that sort of peaceful or that quiet time. And I think from that perspective, I think we've both actually like relished or gone, okay, we actually, don't mind, or we do now that this has happened, like we kind of both have some relief or, some gratitude towards the fact that we do get that peace now. And the peace, the silence can be difficult to sit in. And, in terms of, I think you asked me before about how long did it take for me to be comfortable with that. Sitting in that silence after such, I had 2 children quite close together too, so that noise period was exacerbated and for quite a period of time. I think sitting in that silence took a very long time to get comfortable with, because it's when the thoughts creep in, it's when the guilt creeps in, it's when the catastrophizing creeps in, it's when you start to reflect on yourself and you start to go, oh, how could I have done this? Or what, how did I let this happen? I'm not a great mum. All of those thoughts start to come in your mind in that silence. And for me, what I found was, I continued with the noise. So I'd create the noise so that I wasn't sitting in that silent zone to allow those thoughts and things to start to creep in to my mind and then bring me back down to a place where I, wasn't necessarily coping or where I, wouldn't like to be, is sitting in those thoughts. So
I couldn't agree with that more. I even got a reel there, and it's probably been sitting in my drafts for maybe 3 months. So I'm like, I don't know if I want to post that, but it's exactly that. It's that noise. I would sit on the couch and I would occupy myself with things. I'd turn the TV on. I would call friends. Hey, what do you want to do? I'd make myself busy, which is, it's fine, but not when you're doing it to escape those thoughts. It's like not wanting to go to breath work because I know those thoughts are going to come in and I don't want to witness them. So it's the same thing, but you need to witness them. It's okay to have the yucky thoughts. It's okay to go, oh, I have guilt. I have that. It's about letting them come in and letting them go so that you can release them and start to work out who you are without all of that other stuff. It's about letting go of, oh, I'm just a mum. And I think a lot of women, once they have kids, that is their identity and they live through them. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I just witnessed it in my mum, just like you said. It was everything. So sometimes mum will say to me, oh, but have you done their afternoon tea? No, my kids are actually quite okay to make their own afternoon tea. I will make sure there's food there. Sometimes we will. Sometimes we'll go have ice cream. Sometimes we'll sit around the back deck and I'll make afternoon tea. But really, they're quite capable of looking in the fridge, creating what they want, and we can sit around, But then my mind would go, well, if I haven't made pancakes with like jam and cream and I haven't got it prepared, ready to go, then I'm not the mum I need to be. And it's just that internal chatter. And if you don't have the quiet space to think about it and go, is it mine or is it somebody else's? You never work your way through it to know who the hell you are now.
Hey guys, if this episode resonated with you, please take a screenshot and share it to your Instagram stories and tag myself at A Road Less Doubtful. And if you're ready to lean into the parts of you that have been hidden away and start your road to less doubt and have way more fun, I'd love for you to join our community of like-minded women who build each other up inside our free Facebook group. Tap the link in the show notes below, and I can't wait to see you on the inside and travel this journey together.
Yeah. And I think, for me, definitely thinking back around, regardless of separation, they were probably the biggest struggles that I've had, in my life, particularly when I was a young mum at 20. I really struggled with keeping a clean house and everything being in its place and having to have everything done and also being a working mum. So I was working full time at that stage as well. But then add on top of that, the things like having the meals prepared and the food prepared and all those sorts of things. That in itself was something that significantly impacted me as a parent, was carrying that feeling that I wasn't doing it good enough, especially at such a young age, at 20 years old, to be feeling that way. For me, it was actually almost debilitating, to the point where I couldn't go out on the weekends and do things if I hadn't done all of the washing, if I hadn't cleaned the floors, if the house didn't look a particular way. And breaking free from that was, again, probably one of the biggest struggles, because it was tied so much to my mum, And at that time, when I went through breaking through from this, my mum had passed away, quite recently. So, and that was in my late 20s at the time. So the guilt that I felt, not only to break those habits and those patterns, but the guilt that I felt because it was tied to my mum, who was no longer here, was extremely difficult to actually break. But how I managed to break that wasn't so much from the reflection on, what my mum had instilled in me or whether that was a good or a bad thing. It was more of recognizing or realizing that what was enough, what is good enough for my children. Because I often think that when we have those types of things tied, particularly domestic duties and food, we're looking for the ultimate, like you said, the pancakes with the jam and cream. Well, you don't have to do that. What's enough is a packet of the pikelets from Coles. That's enough. And that's just an example, using that pancake example. But I think for me, it was adjusting to saying, well, what is enough for my kids? Enough for my kids is that they have a warm home that's tidy and they've got the things that they need and that I'm here and I'm available to them, for example. They don't care how clean the floors are. They don't care whether the washing's put away and it's folded. And I had to really slowly learn that. And the only way that I did learn that, and the way that I've managed to push through a lot of things in my life, I don't have any fancy tools to talk to in this podcast or, things that I've used. It's purely been a case of mind over matter. So to just say, well, on Saturday morning, I am going to walk through the door, out the door, and leave the washing in the laundry. And it was those tiny little incremental changes that eventually I could walk out and the house was like a bomb had hit it. But to have done that before, the guilt would often then creep into being sad and depression and forms of anxiety. And it was stemming from something that I never really set out or had as a value, right? It was something that I felt I needed to live up to, but the only way for me personally, and I tried a lot of different things. I had a lot of therapy and counselling. I'd sit there and talk to the counsellor about how I couldn't handle a basket of dirty washing. And if I relate that to, what's a real world problem, it's very, very trivial, but I couldn't deal with. I would walk into the home and I would see that washing and it would just wash over me, that feeling of, you're not enough, you haven't done enough, and then that would spiral out of control. And it's a basket of washing. So, I feel a little bit bit insane sort of, saying that, the basket of washing. But I think many women can relate to that feeling of, not being able to, do things because of that commitment that they feel to keeping that, to keeping the home and having everything perfect for their children, and accepting that, enough, you're doing a good enough job is something that really helped me to sort of move past feeling like that and being able to step away from it all and go, well, it's still going to be there when I get back. It doesn't mean that I'm not a good mum. It doesn't mean that I'm not providing what my children need. It just means I haven't got to it yet, and that's okay.
You say that I don't have all of these expertise and things to draw on, to offer advice here. But that's exactly what you're doing. The whole point is conversations. And I say with real people, everybody's real, but it's lived experience. And I think that is the most important thing. But I also think it's the people listening see the real and see the vulnerability and go, oh, I get it. Because even if we just talk about the washing and the messy home, what woman, especially a wife and a mum, but what woman does not clean their house faster than someone who knows they've got friends coming over in the next hour, right? And that is so completely messed up, because what we really should do, if we really care, like when I came to your house, it was lovely. There was things in places, you had a bit of folding on your table. Sorry if I'm breaking your persona that you didn't want, right? But could I have given a shit? Not even slightly. I walked in and was like, oh, thank God, she's normal. And I think that is, so I try and now kind of live by that. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I really got to get that floor done because people are going to think like, that's disgusting. But I really try, that's my version of your washing basket in reverse. It's like, hold on, I can't do it all. What is important and what do I value? I can either spend the weekend with my kids down the beach, having a swim, going skateboarding and bringing the sand back in the house and going, I can get to that later, or when I don't have them, or the cleaner that I decided I will get fortnightly, because that to me aligns so much better, and I will go and work an extra 2 hours to do that, then be the mum that I thought I had to be and make sure every weekend I waste my weekend, because that's how I see it now, of spending my time to get my house back in order to be ruined within 2 days. Then I'm just going to be cranky and resentful. So what's the point? So if we all allowed each other to see that we actually don't have it all together, this is where the power lies, because we feel more accepted, more normal, more okay, and we help each other and we lift each other instead of being like, well, no, hold on, my house is always amazing. Look, you just walked in and everything's spit polished, and automatically you go, I'm less than. You don't even know you're doing it, but do it because I've made you feel that way, because I've gone and fakely cleaned everything last minute to just go, well, I got it together, but I don't.
Yeah, and I've done it, I've certainly done it where I've, ran around and cleaned everything, and then I've had, friends where I know that I don't need to. And I think we do need to lift each other up. And some of the most comfortable situations that I've had with my friends are the friends that actually walk in and fold the washing for you. And they love that, and they start folding their washing and they start doing your loads of washing. And, and I've had that with, quite a few friends, mums, over the years, different people that I've met, and we've done it for each other, where we've walked into each other's house and rather than judging it, we just start cleaning it. And it's, that I guess that's a way of looking at it in terms of like, how do we change that? How do we stop doing that? And it's only mums and women that, are in this situation that can actually, stop doing that and stop and change that. So if we don't do that, and this is something that's, truly close to my heart, is that we can't pass this down to our daughters, because we're passing down what we've lived through and what we are now saying has been our biggest challenges. The one thing that we can't do is pass this down to our daughters. And I say that with intent, to our daughters, because I see myself doing it to my daughters. I am less inclined to ask my son to clean up, or less inclined to say to my son, you need to keep your room clean, or the house needs to be clean, or even around the cooking. And I see people, and, my sisters, if you listen to this, girls, we put that onto our sons' girlfriends. We judge them around the way that they may keep a home or how they may clean. And this is what creates this situation, is that when we're doing that, we're actually now passing that down to the next generation, for them to feel that they need to cook and they need to clean and they need to be the ones that carry that load. I mean, if you look at Christmas just gone by, it's the nearest example that I can draw. If you look at a Christmas event, or any event for that matter, stop and look who's in the kitchen. It's very rarely the men. Women are in the kitchen. Women are tidying up the plates. Women are bringing out the food, and men are standing around, drinking beers and having a great time. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the reality is that we then pass that down, that our next generations they're the ones that are doing that, doing everything, doing that domestic, which then comes that guilt, which then comes the burden, which then translates into all areas of our life. So, yeah.
And there's no right or wrong. This is not us sitting here going, you should not want to cook, you should not want to clean, you should
not at all.
This is not us doing that. There is so many women who love that role and, they're so present in it and all of that. This is absolutely like, go for it. This is a representation of that place where we felt we lost ourselves or where we held too much control or that, you draw your own comparison in a separate part of your life, right? But what you kind of said there with the men standing around all the women in the kitchen, we've also done that to ourselves along the way society has been as well. Like you said, it's just always been done. So, well, let's just do it the same way. So instead of being like, hey, can you just come in and do this, this, and this? You don't do it. You just, instead of asking, I'll just get it done because I'll be the martyr because it's easier. And you just go and you do it. And then that's where the resentment builds. And that's on you then, so you can change these things. And like you said, intent with the kids as well. I want my kids to go, I'm going to draw my own conclusions. If I want to cook and clean, sweet, go do it. If I want to get out and I want to take on the world in a different way, good, go do it. But those conversations need to be had. And the only way they can do it is if I'm open-minded enough to look at myself and see where I have stayed too narrow-minded in one space and then where I just...
Hello. It's Emily here. You guys may have heard me talk about human design and will continue to do so throughout my podcast because it's helped me to expand my life using it as a tool along my journey. If you would like to take your first step on a road to less doubt, then download your own free personalized human design chart by clicking on the link in the show notes. Then, as you follow along on socials or the podcast, you'll be able to integrate this and gain more clarity of who you are and remember who you came here to be. Lastly, I'd love for you to join our community of like-minded women inside our free Facebook group. All links are in the show notes. All right, back to the episode.
Absolutely. Look, I love to cook. I do. I love to cook. That, it's something that's a passion of mine, and it's something that, I do think that there's elements that creep into things such as, feminine energies and masculine energies. And I think it's totally fine. And it is totally a part of who we are and all of that. I guess it's more around that, creating that. I can't explain it. Like, I guess my mum didn't, I developed these things myself. But I developed them through things such as mum saying, quick, Shirley's coming. Everybody run around and clean up the house and make sure it looks a certain way before she gets here. It wasn't intentional. And that's where I'm sort of coming from. There's nothing wrong with it. And it's totally fine for us to be, doing, the domestic duties, doing the cooking, doing all of that stuff. I think it's more around, how do we frame that as to why do we do that? Why are we doing it? Are we doing it because we love it and because we want to? Or are we doing it because, we feel like we have to? And there's a difference between those things.
And it's that awareness piece. It's that remembering piece. It's the course correcting piece. It's the continuing to look at that, grow and break it down. It's the thing that's why I want to do this retreat. It's why I started looking at my human design. It's why I'm passionate about jumping, I'm going to get in trouble, flying off the cliff. It's like, if we don't keep trying to just look at those parts of us and say, why did I want to become a mum in the first place? Did I do it because that's what the timeline said I should? Because I've gone back and I've looked at that and gone, I stopped traveling at 23 because 23, it's like getting up there, and I wanted to have all my kids by 30. If I had them all by 30, then by 50, I was free, I could travel, retire. And I think about that now, being that, I'm going to turn 40 in a few months. I go, what the hell timeline was that? Whose narrative was that? Because it wasn't really mine. It was what I got shown. And like you said, it wasn't that anyone was doing anything trying to mold me really, but it's just what happened. So it's on you to then, we're not going to get everything right with our kids, We're not going to get everything right with us. You know, we've had our share of lessons, because I'm not calling them mistakes. They're lessons. But if you can't sit back and you can't look at that, and then on the flip side, like we've talked, accept it, flow with it, find the good in it. This is where the juice is, I think, in life. It's take all of those good bits. You know, we can go traveling a little bit more. We get a bit more freedom. What do we love? What wasn't working in that? Cool. Now let's see where we can like squeeze a little bit more goodness and use that week that we have free. What are we going to do with that? How do we then show our kids that? You know, where do they get benefit out of it? How is our partners now growing from it? And then it totally flips the narrative.
Yeah, yeah. And it rings true as well. Like if I think about, you know, in terms of, you know, when moving towards, you know, having that 50-50 model, one thing that we didn't do was sort of make a deal of it. You know, we made it normal for the kids. This is sort of the normal thing that's going to happen now. And I do think it's, you know, it's much more normal now because there's so many children that are sort of living in those sorts of arrangements. I know when we talked to our kids about it, they were like, oh, yeah, and so's Johnny and so's, you know, Georgia. And I know there was all these sort of like, you know, quick links that they could make to people that sort of live the same way. And I guess that sort of ties back to everything that we're sort of talking about, is that we all go about living, right, as best as we possibly can, because that's what we're here doing, and we're not always right and we can't always, you know, do everything perfect, and we don't necessarily have to change things. When that is just a normal part of a transition, so to speak, I guess it's less that the children are going to reflect on that less. It's just a normal thing that has transitioned in their life. And if you can make it as normal as possible, then there's that less impact to then thinking something happened and that caused all of these things for me, you know, later on or whatever it may be. I don't know. That's a sort of a roundabout way of sort of trying to, I guess, pin together that if we normalize things and they are a little bit more sort of normal, then it's less of it becomes less sort of, you know, okay, something less that stands out for you as being abnormal. I don't know. It's a hard to sort of explain it, but
I think it's a perfect way to wrap this entire thing up, because it ties everything we've said back into that whole thing of like, it comes down to, in the end, looking at the things you can control, accepting the things, re-looking at what you can navigate and what you can't, rewriting your story, you know, like, and seeing and just seeing the good and being a little bit more present and not making yourself sick, like not catastrophizing, not making yourself sick from worry, and just normalizing that this is where you're at now. And I'm not saying like we're just not the type of people who are going to sit and take it, right? And we have this grit, we have this gumption, we're going to be like, okay, what's next? And so there is that piece in there. So it's not about giving up and giving in and just being like, okay, this is what it is. That's not what we're saying. It's more like, this is what it is. How do I now use this to my best advantage and make everything flow really nicely without having to control it and overcomplicate it, I suppose. So just
yeah, definitely. And I think too, there's an element of, you know, we often when we go through something like a separation or, you know, something bad happens in our life, we tend to reflect on that and say, you know, that was a bad experience, or, you know, you might have regret, or you might have guilt, or you might have all of these sort of negative feelings around that happening in your life. For me, what's been instrumental in all of it has been looking at it and saying, well, what can I do with it now? Now I'm free from the burdens that I felt, you know, during the marriage, for example. There was a lot of burden. I talked a little bit to that. And, you know, now that I'm free from those things that I was experiencing or I was feeling, because let's face it, everything's not, you know, roses and flowers all the time. There's always, even if you have a happy marriage, there's always things that, may have got to you, may have upset you, may bother you, may, create you to sort of, feel that, that's sort of not really what you want or whatever it might be. When you're then in that situation where you're presented with that's changed, looking at what you can do or what are the things that you felt. I think one of the key things for me was, what were the things, whether or not it was, created from the marriage or not, but the things that I felt that I couldn't do, I now look at those and go, now I can do them. And the hurdle there is getting the confidence and the grit and the determination to then go, well, now that I can do them, how do I go do those things? Like, I now am in a position, I guess I always had the excuse before is what I'm saying. There was always an excuse there for not doing it. And then when you're in the situation now where you don't have an excuse for not doing it, you've got free time to do it, you then need to find it within yourself to actually go and do it. And that has been something that I can burst through my skin with excitement about doing. And when you feel that, burst of excitement, it's just that one more little push in the direction of going and doing those things and becoming who you are. And I think I'm still in it. It's 3 years, but I'm still becoming who I am. And I don't know how long that's going to take, but the fact that I wake up every day not knowing and can have that excitement of what that might be, that is what, gets me over the line each day, because now I'm in a position where it's like I can it can be anything. And it's like reading a new book, I liken it to a new chapter and you get to write it. And that's really, really exciting. And when you push yourself into things that you never thought you would do, it completely changes every element of your existence. And anything is possible. We wouldn't be here today if we both didn't, take that step of doing something that's, quite an extreme sport to get into, particularly, as women. It's something that they're trying to build up in the sport. But, if we'd not have pushed ourselves to sort of go, okay, I'm going to do this, we wouldn't be sitting here today, and we wouldn't have had the connection that we have, and we wouldn't have learnt something along the way. And I think sometimes it's just those little things that make all the difference on a journey like this. Is they are those little bursts of energy that sort of keep you driving towards, what more could come from this, rather than reflecting on, what was or, what's happened. It's what can be.
I'm just smiling along to that whole piece. One, because your level of excitement in that, I can feel it because I get it and I love it. And I think the key part there for me when I listen to that is you don't have an excuse. And I remember saying to my ex, probably 6 months on, it's like, I'm really sorry, because I was like, I used you as my excuse to not be bigger than what I was. Like, I used you to allow myself to play small. So what I would say to anyone listening is, we all do it in whatever capacity. It's like, oh no, my husband won't let me go do that. Or, oh, we don't have the money because blah, 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 blah. There's always an excuse. There's always a reason. And I'm not, this is not me bagging our husband. We do it to ourselves is what I'm saying. We use whatever we've got. And it's those small things. It's the things you tell yourself when no one else is listening. Like, tomorrow morning, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to the gym. And then you don't go and you're like, well, no one else knows. So it's okay. And you break that little promise. And I would do that daily, but I would do it because he was there. So I'm like, oh, well, I don't have to push a little bit harder in my business because, well, he's got that. So I can just, because I wasn't happy or whatever it was, but I made those little excuses. And now my promise to me is that I don't make those excuses. And when I feel that I want to do something, I go do it. And it's the same as you said about those small moments. You step outside the door and you go, I'm not going to do that basket of washing today. And those little micro changes that you don't think are anything in a year's time are the everything. You know, I took a year of not saying no to anything. And that first step of like, oh crap, I don't want to go here. What will they think was the biggest thing. But the next little one was nothing, and the next little one was nothing. And now I'm, you know, sitting here talking to you on this, and I wouldn't have been stepping off the cliff. I wouldn't have come and walked into someone's house who I've met twice, and I wouldn't have sat there and opened up. And there's just those little things, and building that self-trust and not making excuses allow you to just keep becoming more of you. And I think that is the everything of this whole podcast. I love it so much.
Yeah, no, and it's so true. And you know, where does it stop? You know, I'm not sure that I'll ever arrive to a point where I say, well, you know, now this is me. Like, you know, the thought of that, I guess, as well, like in terms of, you know, I get to a point and I say, well, this is Raelene, and I can, you know, describe that without saying I'm a mum or whatever it might be. Like, I don't want to get to that point. I don't want to get to that. I want it to be consistently evolving to be, this is, you know, who I am and who I want to be, and actually living that as well. And it's not to say, I guess, you know, that I didn't have that. And I want to, I guess, be sort of, you know, very transparent in that I didn't necessarily get held back in any way, you know, from my husband. If anything, he actually was probably one to actually push me, and particularly through, you know, the walking out of the house and leaving the washing behind. It was actually him that actually pushed me through, you know, to get me through doing that. So his expectations, I suppose, weren't limiting for me. It was definitely me self-limiting. And for whatever reason, you know, now, and it could be because of, you know, the loss of that relationship and all of those things, for whatever reason, now I feel that I've got more confidence to do it on my own. And also, I guess, you know, that sort of freedom to explore it and not feel that I have to meet someone else's expectations. Even though sometimes those expectations weren't there, you know, and that's probably, you know, with another topic for another day. You know, do we self-invent expectations? Because I know that, you know, in my experience, there were some expectations, but at the same time, I probably self-invented a lot more of those expectations, which were also, you know, something that held me back as well. But yeah, don't want the journey to end. You know, it's that.
It shouldn't. Like, that is the end. That's death. Like, and I think that's one thing that I think we can leave people with. It's like, you need to be okay with your identity shifting and changing and growing. And that's okay. Like, people come into your life, what is the saying, for a season or a reason or a season or a lifetime, you know, and that's okay. That's what it's all about. Like, not holding so tightly onto everything and just loving and enjoying every part of it. And some people will be there for you for the long haul. That's amazing. But you're with you for the entire part, and really starting to love you as much as you can. It's something that, you know, I've talked about. I've had all this love to give away, and it's only been this recent breath work that I've done. And they were like, I had this drop in, I had this thing, and I was like, oh crap, what I can't handle is I want to give all of this love, but I just don't give it to me. Like, I just give it everywhere else. And I really thought I was, but I don't. And so the thing is, you really need to give it to you and see all of it in you, and, you know, allow other people to see it into you and reflect it to you. And just keep growing and accepting.
Definitely. And I really relate to what you said about, you know, you need to sit with yourself, and people do come and go. And something that I've always used or thought about in, you know, in healing particularly through loss, has been that you come into this world on your own. So we're born into the world, and let's just say, you know, it's a blank canvas, so to speak. So you're born into the world on your own. You also leave this world on your own. The experiences that you have and the people that you meet, you know, during that journey, they do help to shape who you are. But ultimately, you need to be comfortable with who you are, despite who comes into your life. And relationships have been a massive part of that, and why I reflect on that, because, you know, we do meet people and we fall in love and, you know, we have relationships, but that doesn't define us. That's not what defines who we are. And often, particularly, I've talked to friends about this as well, and particularly as women, we allow relationships to sort of define us to some extent of who we are. And I guess for me, where I've always tried to sort of make a little bit of sense of it or be comfortable with it, has been that, you know, at some point in time, I will leave this world on my own. And when I do, the only person I need to be comfortable with is me. And that has, like, you know, really helped with going, well, who are you and who do you want to be? What are your values and where do you sit despite any external influences?
There's also, I'm going to probably butcher it, and I can't remember, I was watching it. It was just on socials, and it was this beautiful, it was actually more a religious thing, but it's not what I took away from it. It was talking about birth and death. And it's like, so when you're in your mother's womb, right, you're just in there and you're being prepared. You're being prepared to enter this next space, this next phase of life, if you look at it that way. You have no idea what the hell you're being prepared for. You're just growing and learning and getting these eyes and this skin and whatever, but you have no idea why. You're just trusting. And then you get birthed into this world and you're like, like that's why I needed that. And then you go along, and at each phase of your life, same thing's happening. You're learning these things. You'll hit a relationship. You will, a person at school, you're like, why am I going through this? Why am I leveling up? Why is this happening to me? Like, no, it's always happening for you. And then this next thing comes up and you're like, oh, that's why that happened. And now I have this skill and this part of me, and I've grown into this. Okay, now what's coming next? And if you're always looking at it like, this is preparing me for the next thing, instead of looking at, I'm not where I'm supposed to be, I'm not on the right timeline, trusting again, the self-trust, trust the universe, however you want to look at it, life is going to flow. So maybe on that.
100%. Every experience that I've ever had, I don't look at it in you know, ways of that's happened to me. I look at it in ways of it happened and now I am. And I don't like the saying it happened for a reason, because I don't actually, you know, sort of buy into that. I truly believe things happen because that's how you progress to that next level, to the next stage, to the next beat, to the next person, the next version, if you like. And for everything, good or bad, you take something away from it, and it either makes you stronger, it makes you wiser, it makes you something. And
along the way, as Ray has taught me, we do some bawling. So
we do.
I want to leave you guys with
we did well with not bawling today. We call it do bawling. It's a sort of a thing that I say in my family, and we do it, and we get it out the way, and it's you know, it's a good tool to use, is do bawling and move on.
And I've loved that, and I think it just makes it sound more powerful. It's a good release, and so I wanted to just leave us on that note. So anyone else out there who's a little bit more emotional, likes to cry and likes to release, we invite you to do bawling whenever you need to.
Do bawling. Yeah.
Do some bawling. Raelene, I don't know, but if you want to let people know, if they want to have a chat to you, maybe they just want to pick your brain, where can they find you?
I am on Instagram. I'm not a big social media user. Maybe you can put it in the footnotes. I'm more than happy to have people reach out and have a chat. I'd really, really like that.
Perfect. Well, let's do that. I'm going to chat to you when we stop this about maybe Australia Day, but thank you for coming on. I think you have helped more people than you know by just having a real conversation around this. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having me, Em.
Soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Guys, next time. Bye.